an architecture media podcast supported by the Australian Institute of Architects, produced on Boonwurrung country.
Welcome to Design Speaks Weekly, a podcast that explores the biggest stories in Australian architecture and design. I'm your host, Georgia Burks, and today Emily Wong, editor of Landscape Australia, discusses the art of risk and play in public space with artist and engineer Mike Hewson. But first, here's the latest news headlines from Architecture AU.
In the news this week, 6 architecture firms have been appointed to design 5 new stations along the new 24-kilometre Sydney Metro West rail line, connecting Greater Parramatta to Sydney's CBD. Early concept designs have also been released, providing a first look at the stations. And Brisbane's historic Treasury building is set to be transformed into an educational campus for Griffith University. The campus is expected to accommodate approximately 6,000 students and 200 staff by 2028, exactly 100 years after construction of the original building was complete. And finally, plans for a multi-day walk in Tasmania's Tyndall Range on the state's west coast are one step closer to reality, with federal government approval clearing the way for the project. The 31-kilometre trail proposal includes 2 lake-based hut and camping sites. Those are the headlines for this week. For the full stories and more news, visit architectureau.com. I'm Adair Winder. It's Tuesday, April 14.
Mike Hewson is originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and has been based in Sydney for the past decade. He has a background in structural engineering and heavy civil construction, and he holds a Master of Fine Arts in Visual Arts from Columbia University in New York. Mike is perhaps best known for his inventive hybrid playground projects, which he describes as part art and part infrastructure. In 2025, Mike opened his first solo presentation titled The Keys Under the Mat at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. The exhibition invites visitors to rethink what a playground and public space can be, which is a reoccurring agenda throughout Mike's work. In today's episode, Emily Wong, editor of Landscape Australia, sits down with Mike to discuss how avoiding overdesigning or overprescribing a public space can foster moments of unexpected delight, playful risk, and multi-generational inclusivity.
Afternoon, Mike.
Hello.
It's really great to have you on the show. Your projects, I think, are really interesting examples of how we might approach the topic of designing for play in our cities. Before we kind of delve a bit further into your work, I think I wanted to go right back to the basics. Why do we need play, and how should we be thinking about it when it comes to everyday cities?
Yeah, well, I think play happens irrespective of what people design into cities, but I guess it's something that there's a lot when you're living in a city, you don't have access to like open landscape, and therefore you're kind of the normal developmental things that you would get from being out in open space normally have to be condensed to a much smaller area. And there's actually a lot of needs in that small area that you have to deliver on. Everyone uses the word play. It's a kind of innocuous word now with the number of people that kind of use it in their, the way they set up their coffee area in their corporate office or whatever. Everything's playful. But it really is it's a place for different ages to learn things, and, a kind of a complex, interesting environment is what is needed for that.
I think, I might come back to this idea of intergenerational play a little bit later, which I know is, quite a big focus of your work. But I think I wanted to broach another topic, which I think, comes up a lot in relation to your work, and that's this idea of risky play. And I think risky play is an idea which has definitely been talked about a lot in recent years. Definitely in the built environment. It's a concept that a lot of spatial designers, architects, landscape architects are aware of, they know about, they talk about, but I really wanted to hear your take on it. And I might start off with, why is risk a useful thing to integrate into play?
Well, I guess it's part of the brief, really. It's not an option. It's the fundamental needs for, I guess, play infrastructure, is that, it's providing environments for children to progressively expose themselves to challenges, and that involves risk. I mean, I never termed any of my parks risky playgrounds, but it certainly has been, I've been allocated that category. But I think, the focus is on what, like all the needs of a young person coming into consciousness with all the needs of like stretching their arms and moving their legs and touching different surfaces and working out distances. And really, I mean, I think unfortunately the parks like mine aren't actually that risky. They comply to code. They pack a lot of value into a small area. So it can handle a real thrashing of 150, 200 kids can kind of swarm on it because every surface of the structure can be used. And I think also, I guess there's been a dimension of kind of precarity that I've put into my work, maybe more from the interest as a kind of a sculpture artist person, but they do give that kind of thing of risk that more probably triggers the adults than the children. But I think there is a real responsibility for government, bureaucratic organisations because ideology is baked into everything we design, whether it be a footpath or how we lay out plants. The same thing, particularly in playgrounds, about what society's views are on how to appropriately raise children, how much we trust them, how much we should allow parents to experiment. But so the South Bank project, that was a real, I guess, got me on the radar of the landscape architecture community, particularly in Melbourne. That one, I guess, kind of condensed a lot of different things and kind of provide, I guess it surprised a lot of people, but I think it also surprised a lot of people that it works so well.
I have noticed a lot of people describe your playgrounds, not you, but other people as risky playgrounds. And I think there's just an interesting sort of tension going on there where, as you said, they aren't technically risky in the sense that they comply with playground standards, but there's this very clear sort of perception of risk. They kind of have this aesthetic of risk, and the people that are using them, I think, have this, you sort of get in there and you're sort of thinking, look, that looks incredibly dodgy in a way. How is it that this thing actually holds together? And I think, yes, it is really about that idea of feeling like the decisions that you make in a space matter. Like if you make the wrong decision, that's going to be a consequence. And I think, as you said, that's really important in growing up and sort of nurturing resilience, I think, as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I think as we learn and develop, we have these desires, and you can see it in kids that they do one thing and then they have this curiosity to do another thing. And often if you actually look at it, it's because they intuitively know that's something they need to learn. So they're reaching for something or they're yanking on something because there's some core reason that they need to do that. And that's not a bad thing, and that should be encouraged. With the parks that I've been designing, the main trigger point is just a child being up high without a handrail. I think that just to a lot of people's how's that possible? Or how's that okay? And in the Rocks on Wheels project, all the fall zone offsets are all compliant with all the different ways that playgrounds are certified. I mean, I've been quite tactical in the way I've designed parks to avoid there being any platforms or stairs, because they automatically trigger this need for guardrails and side rails. And when you're talking about spending the public's money on a piece of infrastructure in a very condensed area, a handrail and a guardrail, because you're not meant to be on the outside of them. So every part of the structure that's built to house that thing, the only bit that's being used is the platform, and that's not really doing much for a child either. I've sort of very intentionally designed these open climbing structures that avoid any flat surface, that avoid the categorization of it being a platform or a ramp. And then it allows, say in the boulders instance, to be an entire usable thing, whether it be hang off, climb up, swing off, slide down. And there's nothing unique about it. It's just what nature has all around.
But I think it's also about efficiency, isn't it? It's about using resources in a way that, it's multiple, you can use them for multiple purposes. It's multifunctional. You're not only spending money on a fence being a fence or a boundary being a boundary.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of, and I use that because I know that I don't know all the good things that people will use it for. And you sort of, when you start to prescribe the use too much, A, you're not being generous to people, and B, you're not kind of allowing all the things that you haven't thought of to kind of emerge, which is really what a kind of well-operating piece of public space does. It has so many different uses, and it can handle those uses surprisingly all at once and at different times.
So I think it's sort of, I suppose, riffing on that idea of, allowing or being generous with the way that you treat your users or your audience, in the sense of, I suppose, giving them the latitude, but also the space to be able to
invent things or, transform things or use them in a way that they want to. I think that comes back again in a way to this idea of the unexpected. And, I think the unexpected is something that is a really key feature of your work, in the sense that in your playgrounds, you stumble across things, you find things, there's a real sense of discovery. You have this feeling that you might, find something new if you look hard, or if you're actually, more attuned to your environment. So, do our cities need more of this, of the unexpected? And how would we go about encouraging or creating this?
I guess I, as an artist, have a different brief to, say, a landscape architect. Often when public space projects are commissioned, typically a council has maybe in-house designers or people that will commission a brief, and then that will inform how it's responded to. The criteria of the brief is always like, oh, well, we have this history in this area, and then so we, it always gets geared towards these criteria, which are not that interesting, and often the way that the criteria forces the designer to approach it isn't set up well to generate an interesting outcome. And then you have to go through the drawing process, and then all the interesting ideas that the designer often have get value managed out by the time it goes back into the tendering system. They go back to the builders. The builders can't be bothered doing any of that stuff. Or they say they will at the tender stage, and as soon as they win the contract, they decide there wasn't enough information. So long story short, and I constantly harp on about this, that I believe it's the procurement methods that commission projects in public space often don't generate interesting outcomes. And so to design the unexpected, I think people need to do more innovative, more collaborative procurement methods that, the designers should be talking to the procurement people in their team to figure out how they can better approach it and innovate. It doesn't mean you're breaking the rules or making it problematic. I mean, often these tendering processes end up going to the same big five people anyway. So it doesn't actually help probity often, in my opinion, and it certainly doesn't deliver a more interesting outcome for the public. So I often go, well, let's chase it right back to the start, which is the processes. If you're okay with what's currently being built, then let's celebrate the processes. And if you think there is more interesting projects out there, I always say, look, if you see an interesting project, I guarantee it had a creative procurement process. It's such a big one. It's the big one, I would say. And then, as an artist, again, I have different objectives. And actually, I think when we first met, so long ago, I did that talk, Flirting with Inefficiency.
You did, yes, yeah.
It was my first talk, actually, Flirting with Inefficiency. And back then, it was just, I'd completed the Wollongong public art project, which had a small playground in it. And I think that whole talk was around kind of trying to unpack the futility of artists' goals to, almost constantly fail, or at least question materials or use things in an incorrect way. Not to celebrate it too much, but it certainly led to more interesting outcomes because we weren't, again, not a good business model. I'm still struggling to work out what the business model is for the type of thing I'm doing. And that is the challenge. It'll be great to figure out if I can make it work this year. A lot of designers that I talk to in the landscape community are really interested in doing really interesting, innovative work. And they just get let down by the process, I think. Really let down.
I think it's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know why. I don't know how many times I have to say it before anyone will listen or actually change something. Because most people call me up and they're like, oh, you want to work on the project? And I tell them the basics. And then you get the documents and you're like, no, forget about it. I'm sometimes I just find it very frustrating. But it's not for everyone, because sometimes the process of doing these difficult projects is stressful. It does bleed into your personal life, and it's not for everyone. And I would like to get to a better place in my career where it is much more sustainable energetically, financially. But I do think there is a more sustainable way to do it that does have more creative processes.
Yeah. I think that's a really big topic, and I think, potentially it's a topic that could be explored in a whole podcast episode on its own. And I wanted to come back to that question on intergenerational play, which I think is something that's very sort of, I suppose, dear to you, something that's about a very big focus for you, this idea of bringing people from different generations or demographics together to interact, something that I think is very important for improving the resilience of our communities, particularly in the face of contemporary challenges. We think of this idea as play as something that's quite physical often, but I do think that the way that you approach your projects involves a certain amount of, for want of a better word, sort of intellectual play. I'm thinking of the St. Peter's Fences project, where you sort of took a collection of these sort of leftover fences that had been there as a result of having, see these houses that had been removed to create space for Sydney's third runway. And you created replicas of these fences and used that as a foundation to create a different type of playground, a particular playground that actually sort of highlighted and adopted the neighbourhood vernacular. So something very familiar. And so I think, that's super interesting for me to think about, because not only does it make us think about the suburb's architectural heritage and sort of politics, I suppose, around power, property, urban development in a different way, but I think it also enables this particular kind of conversation around those topics to take place between different generations. For me, that's a kind of play I think I would think of. Is that something that you're quite, that you sort of see as a particular strategy that you deploy in your work?
Yeah, well, I think you got a very captive audience when a grown-up's being dragged to a playground. And I often think about, like, if you're going to be in a playground looking at something and someone spent the time and money making it, why shouldn't it be interesting and stimulating and kind of, like good art? You can't quite get to the bottom of it because it leaves you with a kind of a feeling that you have to mull over. And yeah, I think good bits of design in public space can do that. And again, I guess I've taken it one step further in this Art Gallery New South Wales project, Please Under the Mat, where that's the kind of expanded view of the playground, where it's like, well, the playground's this big. This is the area of the softball, which basically defines the budget for any project, like how much softball do you have? And then you go, well, all the stuff around the periphery, like kids will run through that, but also the adults got to park their prams, sit in the shade. All those are opportunities for interesting bits and pieces. And then I took it further in that project where we have a barbecue and there's actually a sauna and a steam room, showers. And the showers sculpture is the best part of the playground. That thing really broke down the idea of what the edge of the playground is, because kids are sort of running to the corners. And this is what I said to the gallery. I was like, this giant tank space is 2,500 square meters underground. It's like, if you leave a trike or one of those little cars at the entrance, the kid, it's coded child, so it doesn't matter what you do, they're going to think the whole space is theirs. So I've been then focusing on the grown-ups or everyone else. It's not a playground, it's a park. I've just been calling them parks. I stopped calling them playgrounds, call them parks, because then it has to do a lot more for people. It's sitting down, listening to your UE beam, drinking your cask wine or whatever this piece of space needs to do, like the piazza kind of thing. And then so I focus a lot more on what the other generations might need or might be interesting to them. So that's much more interesting to me, to kind of make this ambidextrous space, and again focusing more on the other generations. And then it's good if it's good for everyone. It's good for the kids too.
Yeah. And I think it's great in a sense that what your projects really prove is that, I suppose often we come to a design project and we kind of go, it's got to be inclusive, it's got to be for everyone. And then somehow we think that being for everyone, therefore, makes something, in a sense, bland. But actually we can design things that appeal, where parts of things appeal to different people in different ways.
Yeah. I think people are really scared by the inclusive design or something. They're fearful that they're somehow going to muck it up. And yeah, often what happens is they do get so scared that they don't do anything interesting, and they actually don't really know the needs of what this inclusive group is. Which, a lot of the needs in children these days, it's kind of the attention deficit, kind of sensory autism. A lot of the needs there are just like interesting surfaces, things to look at. Hot, cold, smooth range of surfaces, and actually more conceptually interesting ideas too. So, in this show at the art gallery, I've had a lot of parents and carers come up and say, my kids don't feel like they fit anywhere. They've got like one person had like two kids with autism, and they're like, this park is absolutely for us. Like, it does everything. And I think that's not because we do think about, like, the whole show is on level ground, but then I think you can really limit the outcome for everyone by not thinking about these ambidextrous items or ways of approaching things that meet a lot of needs all at once. And you'd be surprised how complex and kind of challenging a space can be and still meet the needs of this broader community. yeah, it's not just wheelchairs. And I think that's the kind of mistake. It's like, oh, the person in a wheelchair. Yeah, absolutely make sure it works for them too. But there's so many other needs that need to be met.
That's right. And I think, coming back to your show and the title, The Keys Under the Mat, I do think that in a way, really explicitly, I think that you're suggesting, what you're essentially doing is saying, look, this place is yours, make yourself at home, use it as you will. And I think it is reinforcing this idea of the gallery or the museum as a public space, and that this is actually an institution that works for the benefit of the public, that this is public space, we work for you. So, Mike, just one final question, which we're asking all of our guests on this season of the podcast, and that is, what's something that you've changed your mind about recently?
Well, I mean, I've changed my mind around the kind of, the sustainability aspect of delivering these projects around. I mean, maybe it's not change of mind, it's more of a change of focus, that working on these interesting projects, or I like to have they're interesting anyway, there needs to be a financial model to support it through the whole way to make it sustainable for all the people involved. And that's a new focus for me, at least, about, building an economy around how you want the world to be built, or the types of work you want to do, because you can't just wait for someone else to do it, because if it's a different paradigm, you can't expect it to work, I guess, financially. So that's something that I'm focusing on a lot, around looking at a more holistic thing of, are there alternate ways to fund projects, whether it be through, I'm thinking about making parks where there's cafes or merch or any other avenues for funding that you can leverage, social type things, or anything that can be added on, because I think sometimes we need to make our own way, and I don't think it's always through government. So look, it's a watch this space, but it's the topic that interests me, around what do I have in my hands to deliver this more sustainably myself, without putting my hand out to kind of, or just going, this is the only way to do it.
Thanks very much, Mark, for speaking to me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode, which is supported by the Australian Institute of Architects. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a rating. I'm Georgia Burks, and this has been Design Speaks Weekly. Design Speaks Weekly is produced on Boonwurrung country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture.